What's your childhood mystery that you finally solved years later? When I was in elementary school, I always wondered what the teacher's staff room was like. It seemed so mysterious, and I remember trying to get a peek anytime I walked by and the door would open. Later became a teacher, and can fully confirm they're dull, often toxic spaces full of cranky teachers complaining about students. In primary school, elementary school, we used to get picked for a really special awesome job. Going to load the dishwasher and tidy up the teacher's staff room after lunch. Then get to leave class again to unload it once it had finished its cycle. I told my mum about how much the teacher liked me because I got to do it all the time. Then I never got picked again. Turns out she had complained about me being taken out of class to empty a dishwasher. I visited my dad when I was 6 or 7 years old at the place where he worked, or so I was told. I remember remarking at the time, and people laughed at me because I said it looked just like a prison. The people laughing were the guards, and I was indeed visiting my dad at Terminal Island Federal Correctional Institution, where he was a federal inmate. We grew up poor, and at the age of 10 my friends were all having these crazy birthday parties with petting zoos, bounce houses, clowns, etc. So my mother, who is very resourceful, decided I would have a sleepover for my 11th birthday. It was great, and we were gonna make ice cream cones. So we got all the stuff out with my mom, and my mother opened up the box of cones, and they were all smashed up. She said that we weren't having regular ice cream, we were having Magic Castle sundaes, because the broken ice cream cones resembles the sections of a castle. We all thought this was great, and we had them. When my friends went home, they asked their parents to make Magic Castle sundaes. 2 days ago I found out that my mother was getting the past sell-by foods behind the grocery store. They were not expired, just past sell-by date. She had no idea that the cones were brown up until she opened them with us. She thought of the Magic Castle idea quickly, and we all loved it. Just goes to show how stupid kids are, lol. My dad is an ex-Catholic, and every night, when he tucked me in, until I left the house he'd say, "We love you. God bless you. Good night." And I was always wondering why, since he had stopped going to church long ago. Fast forward to me being 28 years old and watching an old Bruce Springsteen concert together, one of his favorite artists, and Bruce says, "We love you. God bless you. Good night." At the end of his set, I turned my head towards my dad and asked if this is why he said that 4 years to me at night. He laughed and said, "I have no original material." My uncle, single/no kids, lived a few houses away from my grandparents, so my siblings and I would go between the houses and always loved my uncle's house because he had a huge fish tank of tropical fish and let us play video games. He was the most fun uncle there was, always taking us to the movies, amusement parks, fishing, golfing, and was so fun to be around. Always had us rolling with laughter. But over time he became less okay with us popping over, and we resorted to sneaking into his house. We didn't get far along, and he was pissed. From that point on we always just saw him in my grandparents' house. We used to joke with him about having a girlfriend over. Fast forward 17 years later, he had a massive heart attack, and while he was in the hospital his sisters went into his house to look for paperwork and get the house ready for his return. There they found rooms full of empty bottles of cheap vodka. My uncle had severe alcoholism for years and none of us knew it, and suddenly so many little things started making sense. He ended up dying shortly thereafter of organ failure brought on by alcoholism. Wasn't even 60 yet. I was watching Star Trek TNG with my dad when someone told Riker to wash his back. When I asked my father why someone would say that to another person, he said, "So you can smell someone coming up behind you." It wasn't until years later that I understood how easy it was to hear watchers wash, and how committed my dad was to willfully deceiving his children for personal satisfaction. When I was 4, I vividly remember getting into my mum's car and her telling me that our cat had died. She told me how she rushed him to the vet, and he was shedding fur. Something was seriously wrong. Despite her best efforts he died. I never knew why he died and why it happened so suddenly, but I accepted that it happened. Fast forward about 15 years, I'm home from college for Christmas. On Christmas Eve, I'm out driving to the store with my dad and uncle. They are talking about the cat my parents got for Christmas one year, the cat mentioned above. My dad says yeah, that thing was too aggressive, so I took it to a farm and gave it away. Normally, when the family pet dies, the parents lie to the kid and say it went to a farm upstate somewhere to ease the burden. Not my parents. They told me the horrifying truth even though it wasn't, true. I solved a family mystery for my mom. I wasn't allowed to play console video games during the week all the way until I was 18, but some nights I'd really be craving it, so I would noiselessly creep through my house into my basement where I could play video games in peace. But once every 30 times or so one of my parents would need something from the basement and I'd quickly turn off the TV monitor, hide in the guest room and pray they didn't turn on a light or notice the box was on. One night I ducked into the guest room and hid behind the bed. To my horror my mom followed me into the room and turned on the lights. I was panicking, so when she started digging through the closet with her back to me, I made a run for it. I nearly brushed her shirt, and if she'd seen me, I'd probably have given her a heart attack. But I made it and kept going all the way to bed. About 5 years went by and my mom said something like "You're such a quiet walker," and I told her it was because of my basement trips, thinking I had nothing to lose. My mom's face went kinda solemn, and when I explained she said so there really was someone down there. And she explained that she remembered that exact night and the feeling that there was a ghost in the room. Over the next couple days she'd stare into space and just say, "I can't believe you were really there." She seemed to get over it, but she probably checks empty rooms closer now. I remember there was a time where I had to start asking to go play in the backyard when I was about 6 to 7, maybe 8, with my siblings, so she could supervise us. We never had to do this previously, so my siblings and I were very confused, and anytime we didn't ask she got us in big trouble. Turns out the neighbors were harboring a known pedophile in their house, and that's why mom got so upset with us going outside without asking. The reason my aunt punched her husband at the pool during a huge family vacation, it was because she found out that the long distance charges to the hotel room they shared had a ton of calls to a woman he was known to think was swell. When I was 10 my godfather gave me $20 as a Christmas gift. At the end of the dinner the money had disappeared. For years my parents blamed me for being irresponsible with my money. Years later we figured out, after she was caught stealing stuff from my aunt's house, that my cousin's fiancé at the time is a kleptomaniac. Turns out she was the one that stole the money. When I was really young, me and my siblings would play in my grandparents' yard. My grandfather would tell us to stay away from the skunk hole at the edge of the yard. We lived in South Texas, so this wasn't something out of the ordinary, and we just avoided it like any other animal home. Years later it dawned on me. It was actually the septic tank access. Not mine, but my husband's. I hope he doesn't see this BC, then my cover is blown. He said in middle school, there was a time that he'd get pulled out of class to shoot free throws in the gym. Only him. He didn't think this was strange, but didn't understand why he was the only one that got to do that. Turns out, his parents told his teachers he couldn't participate in sex edition, haha. When I was like 8 or so, I answered our house phone, and it was a man who asked to speak to my mom. Didn't ask for her by name. Said back quote, "Could I speak to your mom please?" I asked who it was, and he said back quote, "It's Santa Claus." I was so excited and ran to my mom, and I was telling all my friends for days that Santa Claus had called my house. This led me to believe in Santa for a few years longer than most kids normally do. I was heartbroken when I found out that Santa wasn't real. Years and years later I remembered to ask my mom who had called that day and said they were Santa Claus. It was our reverend, and my mom was a deacon. He had known me for years, so recognized my voice when I answered and knew what age I was. It had never occurred to me. One evening when camping, my brother caught a fish that we decided to keep alive in the cooler for some reason. Well, the next morning we ran out to see the fish, and it had grown like 5 inches. We were so excited and didn't know how the fish grew that much overnight. Last year we brought it up, and my dad said that he had got up that morning and seen the fish being taken by a raccoon, and that he spent the next hour or so frantically fishing for another one. He said he caught the new fish, the first one he was able to catch, just a few minutes before we got up. I had never questioned that the fish growing that much as I grew up, but after hearing what really happened I did feel like we probably should have wondered about that more. I remember being about 8 and in the car with my dad. I was in the front seat and we were driving somewhere and this song came on the radio. He cranked it and said something about it being the best guitar playing ever. He really jammed out, which was really uncharacteristic because he was usually so stoic. It was the only time I heard the song, and he died before I could ever ask him what song it was. When I asked around, no one knew WTF I was talking about or what song I was thinking of. So I had this melody in my head for years, but how do you look up a song that has no lyrics? So for years and years, this song stayed on the back burner in my brain. I was afraid to forget it. Somehow this story pops up when I'm like 26 or so, chatting with my husband and we searched YouTube for best guitar songs. After about 15 minutes, we find it. Cliffs of Dover was the song that I'd burned into my brain on repeat for 16 years. Now I jam out to it with my kids. I had meningitis when I was 2 years old, and my baby brother had it also and he died. I had the viral form, he had the bacterial form. I grew up thinking I had it first, and always felt like I gave it to him, and was the reason he died. I know, but you can't help what you think, especially when you're a kid. It wasn't until I was an adult that I learned that he actually had it before me. I don't know why no one had ever told me that before, except maybe they didn't, because they weren't aware that I always harbored this guilt about it, since I kept everything inside. Not one person had ever mentioned to me that he had died before I got it, or maybe I was in the hospital when he died. That part still isn't clear to me. I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks, so it could have been before or during my hospital stay. Reverse of this, as a kid, my dad would call me from the other side of the house to bring him something to drink from the kitchen. He always drank from a straw, and about first grade, I started getting annoyed at this, so I started poking a tiny hole in his straw as my own little vengeance. I didn't come clean about this until I was like 22 years old. The look on his face was priceless. It's like he instantly snapped back to then and knew exactly what I was talking about and just said, "Son of ****, you didn't you?" He just thought we bought cheap straws. I used to go to our local YMCA after school, and during the summer, when I was a kid, we went swimming in the pool almost every day, and being the curious kid I was, I always wondered what was behind the caution doors with the weird triangle markings. Fast forward 8 years, and I'm now working at that YMCA as a lifeguard. And behind the doors? Old, smelly pool chemical testing rooms. Very anticlimactic. How Santa Claus made the peppermint fall through the ceiling. I quickly discovered Santa wasn't real when I was a kid, but I was certain that the Dutch version, Santa Claus, was real because in December, peppermint, tiny Dutch cookies, would suddenly rain down on me, and I thought Santa Claus was on the roof dropping it through the ceiling. I was so convinced about this that I bragged to the kids in my class that my Santa was real and theirs was fake, but the Dutch Santa only visits Dutch kids in America. Apparently my mom would carry handfuls of peppermint in her pockets, and when I wasn't expecting it, she would throw it up in the air above me. I don't know how I didn't realize what was going on at the time. The first year I was in on the secret and I watched my mom throw peppermint on my brother, it seemed so obvious. My dad and sister used to play pranks on my dad's secretary. When we grew up he admitted that he was having an affair with her. It makes my skin crawl thinking that he used my oblivious little sister to flirt with this woman behind our mother's back. Not sure if this is considered a mystery or not. My mother, who passed about in 2009, used to make a meatloaf every single year on Groundhog's Day. Every single year. Every single year she would tell us it was groundhog and I always thought it just tasted like ground beef, but I was kid. I'm 33 now. Last year I said something to my brother about it and asked if he knew where mom got the groundhog. I wanted to do that for son. My brother had no idea what I was talking about. I told him about it and he started laughing. My wife started laughing. My own son, who didn't know why, started laughing. Mom got me good. Mystery solved. It was just regular meatloaf. I wasn't a kid anymore, but some years back, when my mom was terminally ill, my family was receiving food-based gifts from a lot of our friends. Prep dinners, baked snacks, a restaurant gift card or two, the usual support friends extend when people they care about are going through tough times. For a long time I remember dad asking me if I'd tried any pastries we'd gotten from some family friends. We'll call them the Nelsons. I'll let him know they were a little dry but very tasty, and he chuckled. It stuck with me because it was an odd question and reaction. It wasn't until a couple years later, spacing out driving home, that I remembered dad's bizarre reaction and the fact that the Nelsons had suggested easing some of mom's pain with marijuana, which they grew at home around the same period. I had eaten pot cookies. I feel like an idiot for not realizing it, and I don't remember anything that happened after I ate the pastries. I met my wife in college, and when we were dating she often mentioned that when she was a kid she had a play doctor's kit that was stolen from her house. She had some surgeries really young, and so her parents bought it for her to demystify the doctor's office. She'd use it all the time on her dad poking and prodding him. One day I asked her about the robbery. Did they take everything? Jewelry? The TV? Other valuables? No, and no. It hit me. I asked, so someone broke into your house and only stole your doctor's kit, leaving anything worth fencing there? Yeah, why? Did you ever consider your folks were tired of you using the kit on them all the time after you got better? Oh, damn. We confirmed it with her dad later, but for 15 years she had believed some thief broke in and only stole her beloved doctor's kit. I have these pale white flecks in the center of my front teeth. Adult set. Everybody I meet, upon seeing my smile for the first time up close, remark on it. I found out about 2 years ago that it's caused by consuming above a certain amount of fluoride before your adult teeth set in. It's called dental fluorosis. As a kid, I used to swallow toothpaste rather than spit it out. Plus our water is fluoridated, so I suppose that's how I got to consuming that much fluoride. I live and grew up in the deep south. As a child from earliest memories until about 8, we would take a winter trip up to Vermont to see the grandparents. I would have scary nights hearing ghosts wailing outside the windows. It was terrifying. GPs moved south and we stopped going. When I was in my 30s I took another trip up to Vermont. First night stay, I heard the ghosts. Turns out the winter winds up north are way different than the winds of southern nights. Suddenly my general fear of the dark disappeared as I realized fully what the source of the sound was. I figured out my dad wasn't on a business trip in 2005. He was at my uncle's wedding and didn't want to take me all the way there because it was in Ireland and he knew I'd want to go if he told me. In hindsight, I probably should have picked up on the lie. My dad is a school custodian. In kindergarten I had a guinea pig that turned into many guinea pigs after I babysat the class guinea pig for Christmas break. Parents were thrilled. Anyway, my teacher took the entire family back to her house and was supposed to sell them, and I would get my original guinea pig back. They never returned, and my parents told me they all got sold together as one big happy family. I didn't find out until I was maybe 25 that a coyote actually got into the cage and they all got eaten together as one big happy family. This is a way. For over 20 years I had a very distinct memory of seeing this movie with my dad around the holidays in our living room. It was a black and white movie, but I had a vivid memory of only this one specific scene. Elle was probably about 6 or 7. When I watched it with him, it bugged me for the longest time. I would think about it periodically for years, because I remembered it being so cool. I just wanted to know what movie it was, so I could check it out as an adult. Then one day, I can't even remember where, but someone online somewhere had described this movie and mentioned the name, and it sounded really similar to the one I remembered. I looked it up on YouTube, and it turns out the movie was Babes in Toyland / March of the Wooden Soldiers. The scene I remembered so vividly was all of the soldiers marching out of the toy shop. Figuring this out was literally one of the most satisfying things I've ever felt in my life. My grandmother is extremely religious. Despite this, she was surprisingly chill about both my sister and me having children out of wedlock. Never made much sense why she was so understanding when I knew she did not approve. Cut to my wedding. After the ceremony she calls me over and puts a ring in my hand. It was my late grandfather's wedding ring. It was a gift which I wore for as my wedding band for many years. Once I started inspecting it, I saw there was an engraving on the inside. It was my grandparents' initials and the date of their wedding. That date was after the day my mother was born. Ah yes, I realized, she's rotten just like us. Lol. The weird smell that I referred to as a stinky cheese smell were probably a symptom of seizures. I would happen maybe twice a year. It's not really like cheese. It's like a smell that isn't a smell. IDK how to even describe it. It was so minor parents disregarded it. I can remember it starting in 2nd grade. I suddenly started having it a lot more as an adult when I hit 28 and got diagnosed 2 years later after symptoms became way more extreme. Makes so much sense now. As a kid, I played Medal of Honor, Allied Assault with my brother. We got to the 5th level, which took place in a rainy French city similar to Saving Private Ryan. However, we always got stuck on the first objective, which was to locate the bazooka team. There were no clues as to where this team was in a giant rubble-filled city with poor visibility. To make things worse, hidden enemy snipers would constantly fire at you, making the search much more difficult than it already was. My brother and I practically scoured every nook and cranny, but we never found this team. If the bazooka team was trying to stay hidden, they were doing a good job. In the months that followed, we reinstalled and replayed the game several times, but would always get stuck on that level. Fast forward several years, and I got the digital version of Allied Assault for nostalgia's sake. I dreaded playing the 5th level, but to my surprise, I easily cleared the first objective by happening across the corpses of the bazooka team in one of the buildings. Turns out the CD we originally played on was bugged where the bodies never even rendered into the game. All we did was waste several hours looking for a group of people that never made it to the battle in the first place. Giddy at the prospect of finally completing the game, I happily continued the level only to quit when I kept getting sniped by those damn hidden snipers. My dad used to occasionally burst out with this one line of a song, said Barnacle Bill the Sailor. Only ever that line. When I was 6 or so I asked him why, and he said it was an old drinking song that was absolutely filthy, and I was too young to hear the rest of it. This continued once or twice a year until I was 18. I told him I was an adult now and he could tell me the rest of the song. I distinctly remember him looking up from the newspaper, sighing and folding it, then going, "The truth is I can never remember the rest of the song." And then went right back to reading the newspaper. When we were kids we'd ride our bike up the road to this horse ranch that sat up on a hill. So many memories on that hill. Anyways, in the distance was a huge hill that was eventually bought and turned into a winery. This hill was covered in trees minus the bare area that faced toward us. Well, on one autumn afternoon my best buddy and spotted something very furry walk on 2 feet from one tree to another. This hill is likely hundreds of yards away from us, and whatever we saw was clearly bigger than us. Since the sun was setting, it obviously scared the shot out of us, and we screaming down the road on our dirt bikes away from whatever that thing was. Turns out many years later that I discovered what my buddy and I saw was likely a bear walking on 2 feet. For nearly a decade my buddy and I would have sworn we saw a Bigfoot.